Let's bring in Felicity Huston, accountant, member of the Northern Ireland Conservatives, business leader and Talkback contributor. It would have to be said. The most important description of all. How are you doing, Felicity?
Well, miserable as usual due to what's going on. I mean, I do think, it's important. You read out most of the new regulations and restrictions that were brought in, but there was one key one I do think people need to know about that wasn't mentioned.
Go ahead.
And wasn't mentioned by the announcement yesterday. It's the exemption of wearing a face covering where it causes severe distress is being removed.
Yeah.
And also those who have a medical exemption for wearing a mask have to prove it. Now, that's just been put out. And I saw last night on Twitter the response from victims of sexual crimes to that thing about severe distress. I can't believe they have just put that out quietly, no discussion about it, and no explanation for how people are to manage this. You know, it is a really quite alarming thing. I don't understand scientifically why the people who have these problems are to be put through this. I mean, women who've been orally raped, right? You've probably been watching that show, The Girl Before, this week. And one of the main protagonists had that happen to her, and it was all about the impact it has had. People like that who've had that experience can't wear a mask in many cases. What are they supposed to do? Are they to just stay in the house forever until the Department of Health decides they're allowed out again? I mean, I find it really quite distressing. Such a cruelty.
There are two issues there. You're talking laterally there about psychological issues and distress, of course.
Yeah, which has been, removed.
That's a very important issue. But let me take the first one first, and we'll bring Seamus and Irene in on this as well. And that is, from the beginning of this, when we've had debates about medical exemptions for mask wearing or face coverings, Seamus, I have talked to many experts in the area of asthma and other areas of medicine who have said there is no clinical condition they know of that would prevent you safely wearing a face covering. In fact, one doctor on this programme, one expert we had, said if you have a medical condition, I'm not talking about psychological issues, medical condition, Seamus, that would mean that it would be dangerous for you to wear a face covering. It's probably dangerous for you to leave the house.
This discussion has gone round in circles, as you quite rightly said, William. I suppose getting back to the exemption, this has been introduced some time ago over in England, and there is a process whereby people can apply for that exemption and seek advice of either the general practitioner or the hospital specialist as to whether they've got an exemption or they can have an exemption.
What is a clinical or medical exemption? Not talking about psychological distress, those kinds of issues. We'll come to that in a minute.
The exemptions are more in place for things like vaccination. So if you're going to...
but I'm talking about face masks. About face coverings.
In my personal opinion, there are no exemptions physically for people not to be wearing a face mask.
Right. You know of no clinical condition that would stop you wearing. And that's what every expert I've asked has said. So that's on one side of this. And if you go into a local store and someone's not wearing a mask and the staff person asks them and they say, I've got a medical exemption. I mean, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? And the person who's in the store, running the store, isn't in a position to talk about it or argue about it. Well, what about psychological issues, Seamus? Issues of distress?
Yeah, I can understand in some of the scenarios that...
And this is more difficult, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is more difficult. Some of the scenarios your contributor has mentioned are shocking. Yeah. I have to say, I don't think there's an easy solution to it. I think it is something that as a society we probably need to discuss further, the degree of psychological impact on someone who has been through some of those shocking incidents that have been described. I don't have a simple answer to that one at this moment in time.
I don't think it's a simple question, and I think Felicity has laid out some of the issues very well that show just how complex a question it is.
Well, shouldn't they, before this has been put in the public domain, and it's one of the regulations or whatever the various technical terms they use for it as, shouldn't this have been discussed? Shouldn't Seamus, as somebody in an important medical role, know what people with these problems should do? Because he's giving advice on medical exemption, so surely he should also, because there would have been a discussion by the Department of Health with the main characters and individuals in the health environment, what they're going to do about these people. You don't just throw this out without having put in, thought about it and rationalised it and decided what the advice would be. I can't believe it would just be hurled out there 2 days before Christmas without any proper guidance or thought. That's really quite distressing and shocking. We're better than that, surely.
So and incidentally, you can find the summary of these new regulations on the BBC NI News page, Jane McCormick did a very useful piece yesterday, which is up there, NI COVID-19 restrictions, what are the rules? And as Felicity's just been describing it, I'll read what Jane has written there, her summary as well, which is the executive says the exemption of wearing a face covering where it causes severe stress will be removed, and the onus of proving an exemption on medical grounds will be on the individual. So there can still be an exemption basis for not wearing a covering, but you will now have to, the individual will now have the onus of proving that there is such a thing in that case. Incidentally, the former Prime Minister Tony Blair has been talking about some of this, as is his wont, on Times Radio yesterday. He said this to anyone still unvaccinated.
We need to target the unvaccinated. I mean, we still, frankly, if you're not vaccinated at the moment and you're eligible and you've got no health reason for not being vaccinated, you're not just irresponsible. I mean, you're an idiot. I'm sorry. I mean, that is, truthfully, you are. I mean, because this Omicron variant is so contagious. If you're unvaccinated and you're in circulation, you're going to get it.
He went on to say in that interview when he said they need to be targeted, he wasn't talking about policing actions, that kind of thing. He meant messaging and persuading people to get vaccinated. What did you make of that, Felicity?
Oh, well, I won't take any lectures from the man who started the war in Iraq, on the supposed weapons of mass destruction. Tony, where were they? I'm old enough to remember that, so are you. Well, a lot of people won't, but I know what he did to Iraq. Ask the Iraqis if they'd like to listen to advice from Tony Blair.
So, I mean, I get that. I get that people don't like Tony Blair because of the Iraq thing, and a lot of Tories, of course, voted with him on that war, right? But does that mean he can never say anything on any subject ever again?
Well, it does undermine
does it really
his
mean
authority.
That?
And could I also remind you that when the MMR issue started up, he and his wife refused to say whether Ewan had been given the combined vaccine or not. They said it was a private matter and they wouldn't discuss it. So back then, that was fine for the Blairs. You may remember all this. I was a young mother at the time, so I certainly remember it. They refused to discuss it. That led to conclusions that Ewan had not been given the combined vaccine, but who knows? But that was the attitude. It's changed now, and everybody recognises that measles, which was the main issue in that vaccine, is extremely dangerous for children. But that's their attitude then. So Blair is, one tune for him and another for the rest of us, as always.
If we park Tony Blair then for a second.
What did you expect? Great lad.
This is why I love you. You don't mess about. You say what you think. Let's take a call from Gerard. Hi, Gerard.
How you doing there? I just want to say something. When I'm out, I always wear my mask, and I have asthma, and I must say, breathing with that mask is hard going, but I'm happy to do it. But you see, you go outside, and at least half the places, half the people haven't got a mask on, and you wonder how the country's coming down with plenty of medical issues.
Yeah.
People know that there's nobody going to touch them, so people just do their own thing now.
Thank you, Gerard. And look, I know a lot of people are saying one of the things we can do about masks is, and Gerard it makes the point about people not wearing them. What about people who work in stores not wearing masks? I don't know what the rest of you have seen when you're out and about. Gareth, do you see people who actually work in stores not wearing masks?
Well, I think it's mixed. Sometimes compliance, and it depends sometimes
on
the culture of the shop.
Surely the stores can actually force their own staff to comply with the law. The law requires you to wear a mask.
Well, they should do, but I think what we're seeing both within organisations and employees and also the general public, the customer, we see different levels of compliance. We see different cultures. Some people are happy to comply and are very good, and you can go into a shop just down the street and we're seeing very different levels of compliance. And I think that is caused by a lack of consistent messaging and confusion around messaging, where people will take a reason an inaccurate reason or an excuse not to comply, and use that rather than an across-the-board, consistent, simple message. It's not, exemptions aside, it's not a difficult thing for the vast majority of people to do, and they should just do it.
This is one of the easier things that we could do, isn't it? Mask wearing. And maybe if we'd done it earlier on, we could have avoided some of the restrictions and maybe even some of the lockdowns around the world. But Felicity, when we've heard people from the retail sector saying you cannot expect the retail sector to enforce this legal requirement to wear a mask in their premises, we can have that argument, and we have had that argument, but surely, Felicity, we can expect the bosses of retail premises to force their own staff to comply with the law and wear masks.
Well, again, as we said, until this Monday, there are exemptions. And I mean, the gentleman with the asthma, I sympathise with him. I know people who have extreme breathing problems who just can't wear them, partly because it brings on a sort of an associated stress thing, and there's a lot of people with exemptions. But we have the highest levels of disability and ill health in the whole of the UK, some of the worst in Europe. So maybe we do have more people who can't wear a mask for one reason or another than the affluent Surrey areas where people are healthier, live longer, etc.
Well, the human respiratory system works differently in Antrim.
No, I didn't say that. I said that we have higher levels of it. You will find that of different things. And we haven't actually, I mean, I know I've heard people say that sure people could wear them. Many of these
Felicity,
people are not wearing them 12 hours a day.
aren't people just making this up often? They're saying I have an exemption. They don't have an exemption.
Why do you not believe them?
Well, I don't believe them.
Okay, that's up to you. You go and talk to them about it and see how you get on.
I see people in stores doing heavy lifting, running up an aisle, doing all kinds of stuff.
Yes, but I've already explained the other sort of reason.
There's no clinical exemption there that would apply, is there?
So none of these people have ever had any other experiences. You can assess that. That might just mean they can't wear a mask. We've been talking about that earlier, and that was all just.
You don't think anybody's flouting the rules?
I'm sure some may be, just like many other things. Okay, let's talk about the G7.
Some people flouting the rules,
right? That really shocked me. Do you remember them all together wearing a mask, and then suddenly none of them were the leaders of the world who were all telling us we must wear masks, and they wear masks sometimes, and then they all stand together, and Macron puts his arm around Joe Biden, who's elderly and therefore very vulnerable, and not wearing a mask. So which is it? So maybe if we could be sure that our leaders...
That goes back to the messaging.
...wore them all the time, and they're shown constantly not to.
No, that's absolutely a reasonable point.
So do they think it's dangerous? Clearly not.
No, I've seen that myself, and that absolutely is a sensible point. Of course it is, as you often make sensible points.
Oh, thank you, Will. You are nice.
Hayley is there. Hi, Hayley.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome.
I have 2 children with high-functioning autism. One... can wear a mask and can tolerate a mask, and the other one can't. She just finds it so uncomfortable and sensory issues.
Yes.
And it's not worth the hassle for her.
Right.
Now she's 12. Now when it comes to everything else, sort of hand hygiene, alcohol gel, she is completely OTP, but she cannot tolerate a mask.
Yeah. And I mean, that for most people, I would have thought, Hayley, is a clear example of an exemption.
Well, I would think so. And her school facilitates that, because, I mean, they're aware that she can't tolerate it.
Yeah, it's a case of you've got sensory issues, you've got autism, severe cases, and that. I mean, Seamus, obviously, I'm not asking you to diagnose people over the phone, but Seamus, there are cases of exemptions that can come into play to do with learning disabilities and other kinds of issues.
Yeah, I think that's a very clear example that your caller gave there, where there's even a difference between children with levels of autism as to what's acceptable or not. And you're absolutely right. In an instance like that, that's a very clear exemption from wearing a face mask.
Hayley, thank you very much. I wish you well. It's very, very difficult. I know, very difficult in that situation.